The transport shuttle descended through the orange clouds of Karas 7, and Daeun Kim pressed his face against the window. Below them stretched endless rust-colored rock and dust. Nothing moved. Nothing grew. The planet looked dead. "Attention all trainees," the pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "Welcome to your final survival test. May your gods have mercy on you, because this planet won't." Daeun glanced at his teammate Hyejin Park, who sat across from him checking her equipment one last time. Next to her, Minho Choi was scribbling calculations on his datapad, probably already thinking about shelter construction. They were the only 3 humans in a cohort of 20 trainees from across the galaxy. The shuttle touched down with a thud that shook dust into the air. The cargo door opened, and immediately the temperature sensors in Daeun's suit started flashing warnings. Outside, the temperature was 45 degrees Celsius. By nightfall, it would drop to -30. Instructor Velroth stood at the bottom of the ramp, waiting. The reptilian alien was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark green scales that seemed to absorb light. Red eyes watched the trainees emerge from the shuttle with an expression that might have been amusement or hunger. With Velroth, it was hard to tell. "Form ranks." The instructor's voice hissed through the translation device on his chest. 20 trainees lined up on the barren ground. Besides the 3 humans, there were 4 Clictor insect-like beings with 6 legs and shimmering carapaces. 3 Nephori floated beside them, gaseous creatures contained within environmental suits that glowed with soft blue light. 2 Orthans stood at attention, their crystalline bodies refracting the orange sunlight into rainbow patterns. The rest were species Daeun had only read about in training manuals. Velroth paced before them, each footstep crunching on the rocky surface. "You have survived desert worlds and ice planets. You have endured zero gravity and crushing depths. You have proven yourselves worthy of entering the final phase of your training." The instructor stopped walking and turned to face them. "This is Karas 7. Atmospheric composition is 80% nitrogen, 18% carbon dioxide, 2% trace gases. Toxic to most species without breathing apparatus. Surface temperature varies by 75 degrees between day and night. Solar radiation is 3 times galactic standard." Daeun adjusted the breathing mask on his face. The thin atmosphere made everything feel distant and muffled. "Your task is simple," Velroth continued. "Survive for 72 hours. You will be issued minimal equipment, 1 shelter unit per team. Basic tools, water for 1 day only, and emergency beacons. Teams will spread across different sectors to prevent resource sharing." One of the Clictor raised a clawed appendage. "Instructor, what about food rations?" Velroth's scales rippled in what Daeun had learned was the reptilian equivalent of laughter. The sound sent chills down his spine. "Food?" The instructor repeated, drawing out the word. "Look around you, trainee. What do you see?" The Clictor S antennae drooped. "Rock, instructor." "Only rock, exactly." Velroth walked to the edge of their landing zone and kicked at the dust. "Karas 7 is classified as a dead world. No atmosphere suitable for complex life. No water cycle. No vegetation. No animals. No insects. No microorganisms above Class 1 extremophiles." The instructor turned back to face them. "No food exists here. Nothing grows. Nothing lives. You will learn to endure hunger as your ancestors did. You will understand what true survival means." Murmurs spread through the group. One of the Nephori dimmed its glow nervously. An Orthan's crystalline structure made a worried chiming sound. Hyejin leaned close to Daeun and whispered through her comlink, "Did he just say no food for 3 days?" "That's what he said," Daeun replied quietly. "Want to make a bet?" Minho's voice joined their private channel. Daeun smiled beneath his breathing mask. "I'm listening." "I bet we eat better than Velroth by day 3, Minho said. Hyejin snorted. "You're crazy." "You heard him." "Nothing lives here." "He said nothing lives here by his definition," Daeun corrected. "Humans have a different definition." Before they could continue, Velroth's voice cut through the air. "Teams, collect your equipment and move to your designated sectors. You have 10 minutes before the shuttle departs. Your extraction will occur in exactly 72 hours from now. Do not activate your emergency beacons unless you face immediate death. Understood? Yes, Instructor. 20 voices shouted in unison. The next 10 minutes were chaos. Teams rushed to the equipment pods, grabbing shelter units and toolkits. The humans worked efficiently, with Haijin coordinating while Minho checked each item. Dae-yun studied the terrain map on his datapad, noting their assigned sector was in a canyon system 15 kilometers north. Team Humanity, Velroth's voice made them turn. The instructor stood behind them, red eyes gleaming. I have been teaching survival for 213 years. I have seen species far older and wiser than yours attempt this test. Many fail, some break. A few succeed through pure willpower. He leaned down, bringing his massive head level with Dae-yun's. I have watched your species' files. Humans are weak, soft. You come from a world with abundant food and water. You have never known true deprivation. Dae-yun met the instructor's gaze without flinching. With respect, Instructor, you should read our history more carefully. Velroth's scales rippled again. Confidence is good. Arrogance is fatal. We shall see which you possess. The instructor straightened and waved them away. Go, your sector awaits. The humans loaded their equipment onto a hoversled and began the trek north. Behind them, the shuttle's engines roared to life. Dae-yun glanced back once to see it rising into the orange sky, growing smaller until it disappeared. They were alone now on a world that wanted them dead. So, Haijin said after they had walked for an hour, what's the plan? Dae-yun was scanning the rock formations around them with increasing interest. Velroth made a mistake. What mistake? Minho asked, adjusting the hoversled's controls. He assumed we'd accept his definition of food. Dae-yun knelt beside a shadowed crevice in the rock and pulled out his scanner. Earth is classified as a death world by galactic standards. Do you know what that means? Haijin and Minho exchanged glances. That our planet is considered extremely dangerous? Haijin offered. Exactly. And do you know how humans became the dominant species on a death world? Dae-yun stood up, reading the scanner results with growing excitement. We learned to eat things that would kill most other species. We learned to find food where nothing should exist. We learned to take poison and make it nourishment. You're saying there's food here, Minho said slowly. I'm saying Velroth doesn't know what food is. Dae-yun pointed at his scanner. Look, organic compounds. Trace proteins. Chemical signatures consistent with extremophile colonies. Haijin crowded close to look at the screen. Those are Class 1 extremophiles. Velroth said himself they exist here. They're not considered food by any galactic standard. Dae-yun grinned. They're not considered food by galactic standards. But Earth standards? We've been eating extremophiles for thousands of years. We call them fermented foods. Understanding dawned on Minho's face. You want to eat the local microorganisms. I want to eat everything we can find, Dae-yun corrected. And I want to cook it well enough that Velroth eats his words along with our cooking. Haijin looked between her two teammates, then at the barren landscape around them. Slowly, her expression changed from doubt to determination. All right. Let's show them what humans can do. They continued north toward their sector, but now they walked with purpose. Where Velroth saw a dead world, they saw possibility. Where other species would starve, they would feast. The galaxy was about to learn an important lesson about Earth's children. Humans don't just survive. They thrive. The canyon walls rose around them like ancient giants frozen in time. Dae-yun ran his hand along the rock face, feeling the texture change from smooth to rough. The shadows here were deeper, protected from the harsh sunlight that baked most of Kara 7's surface. Temperature here is 15 degrees cooler than outside, Minho reported, checking his environmental scanner. The canyon creates a microclimate, which means what? Haijin asked, setting down her pack with a grunt. Which means conditions different from the rest of the planet, Dae-yun explained. He was already moving deeper into the shadowed areas, his scanner held high. Different conditions mean different possibilities. They had been walking for 4 hours since leaving the landing zone. Most teams would have immediately set up shelter and begun rationing their single day's worth of water. But the humans had other priorities. Heijin pulled out the terrain map. Our assigned sector covers 12 square kilometers. That's a lot of ground to search. Then we better get started. Daeyeon knelt beside a crack in the canyon wall where darkness seemed to breathe outward. His scanner beeped rapidly. Minho, come look at this. The engineer joined him, adding his own scanner to the investigation. Moisture. Underground water source, maybe? Maybe. Daeyeon stuck his hand into the crack, feeling cool air wash over his fingers. Or maybe something better. He pulled out a small sample collector from his kit and scraped along the inside of the crack. When he brought it back into the light, the collection tube showed a greenish-brown substance clinging to the rocks. Is that what I think it is? Heijin asked, leaning close. If you think it's some kind of lichen or moss, then yes. Daeyeon sealed the sample and labeled it. Velroth said Class 1 extremophiles exist here. This is probably what he meant. Can we eat it? Minho asked the obvious question. Can we eat it safely is the better question? Daeyeon collected more samples from different areas of the crack. On Earth, we eat dozens of species of lichen. Some Nordic cultures have been doing it for thousands of years, but each species is different. Some are nutritious. Some are toxic. Some need special preparation. So we might poison ourselves, Heijin said flatly, or we might have our first meal. Daeyeon stood up and dusted off his knees. That's why we test carefully. Small amounts first. Proper cooking. We treat it like our ancestors treated every new food they found. They spent the next 2 hours exploring the canyon systematically. Minho's scanner proved invaluable, detecting temperature variations and chemical signatures that led them to more discoveries. In a thermal vent where superheated air rose from deep underground, they found strange crystalline formations that dissolved in water with a savory smell. In the deepest shadows where direct sunlight never reached, they discovered pale fungal growths that crumbled at a touch but released a scent that reminded Daeyeon of mushrooms. Look at this, Heijin called from near a rockfall. She had moved several smaller stones aside to reveal a cavity beneath. Her flashlight illuminated something moving. Daeyeon joined her quickly, scanner ready. Inside the cavity, dozens of pale grubs writhed away from the light. Each was about the length of his finger, segmented and blind. Protein, Minho said with satisfaction. Actual protein? Daeyeon ran his scanner over the grubs. High protein content, minimal toxins detected, similar composition to Earth insects. He looked at his teammates. People eat bugs on Earth, lots of cultures do. These should be safe if properly cooked. Should be, Heijin emphasized. That's very different from definitely safe. Everything is should be until someone tests it. Daeyeon carefully collected several grubs into a sealed container. That's what makes us explorers. By the time the orange sun began its descent toward the horizon, they had cataloged 17 different potential food sources. Most were extremophile colonies lichen, fungi, and bacterial mats growing in protected areas. But they had also found the grubs, discovered a cave system that contained tubers growing in nutrient-rich mud, and identified several mineral deposits that Daeyeon suspected could be processed into something useful. Okay, Heijin said as they finally set up their shelter unit in a protected alcove. We found things. Now what? Now we prepare them. Daeyeon laid out their finds on a clean rock surface. First rule of survival, cooking kill anything that might kill you. That means heat. Minho was already working on that problem. He had collected several dark volcanic rocks from near the thermal vent and arranged them in a circular pattern. These stones retain heat extremely well. If we place them in the thermal vent for an hour, they'll stay hot for hours after we remove them. Makeshift oven, Daeyeon approved. Good thinking. While Minho handled the heat source, Daeyeon and Heijin began preparing their samples. The lichen was scraped clean and boiled in a small amount of their precious water. The boiling killed any dangerous microorganisms and broke down some of the tough cellular walls. The resulting liquid was greenish and smelled like wet earth. But it didn't smell dangerous. The crystalline formations from the thermal vent dissolved easily in hot water, creating a clear broth that had a surprisingly pleasant aroma. Chemical analysis showed high mineral content but nothing toxic. This is actually kind of amazing, Hyjin admitted, watching the crystals dissolve. It's like natural bouillon. The grubs were the biggest challenge. Dae-yun had eaten insects before, cricket flour, roasted grasshoppers, even ant eggs in a specialty restaurant once. But these were alien insects from a planet that shouldn't support life. He decided to be extra cautious. We roast them thoroughly, he decided. High heat, long cooking time. If there's anything dangerous in them, we cook it to death? When Minho returned with the heated stones carefully carried in a makeshift tong made from bent metal, they placed them in a shallow depression and laid the grubs on top. The heat was intense enough that the grubs sizzled immediately, their pale bodies darkening and crisping. The smell was not terrible. Actually, it reminded Dae-yun of roasted chestnuts mixed with cooked shrimp. Who's testing it first? Hyjin asked, eyeing the cooked grubs with suspicion. I'll do it. Dae-yun picked up the smallest grub, now crispy and brown. If I die, you two survive on lichen and crystals. Very heroic, Minho said dryly. Dae-yun bit off a small piece and chewed carefully. The texture was crunchy on the outside, softer inside. The flavor was mild, slightly nutty, with a hint of minerals. He swallowed and waited. Well? Hyjin demanded after 30 seconds. It's actually okay. Dae-yun took another small bite. Not great, but definitely edible. Tastes like a cross between shrimp and nuts. They waited 15 minutes to ensure he didn't develop any immediate reaction. When Dae-yun remained healthy and alive, they divided the remaining grubs and each ate a small portion. Then they tried the processed lichen, which was less pleasant but not inedible, and the crystal broth, which was actually quite good. This is insane, Hyjin said, sipping the warm broth. We've been here 8 hours and we're actually eating. We're doing what humans do, Dae-yun corrected. We're adapting. That night, while other teams across Kara 7 settled into hungry meditation or began rationing their body's energy reserves, the human team sat around their heated stones and planned. They had proven that food existed on this supposedly dead world. Now they needed to find more of it, process it safely, and create enough to last 3 days. The cave system, Minho said, studying his scanner data. The tubers we found there could be a major food source. But we need to map it properly and determine how much we can safely harvest. The thermal vents might have more of those crystals, Hyjin added. And if we can find more grub colonies, we have protein covered. Dae-yun was thinking bigger. An idea had been forming in his mind ever since Velroth's mocking words about no food existing here. The instructor had been so certain, so absolutely convinced of this world's emptiness. What better way to prove him wrong than with irrefutable evidence? What if we didn't just survive? He said slowly. His teammates looked at him questioningly. What if we thrived? Dae-yun continued. What if, instead of barely making it through 3 days, we created something amazing? Something that shows every species in the galaxy what humans can do. You want to throw a dinner party on a dead planet, Hyjin said, disbelief in her voice. I want to prove a point, Dae-yun corrected. Velroth said no food exists here. Let's show him what food really means. Minho started laughing, then stopped when he realized Dae-yun was serious. You actually want to do this? Why not? Dae-yun gestured to their meager but real meal. We've already done the impossible. We found food where nothing should exist. Let's take it further. Let's create something memorable. Hyjin looked at the barren canyon walls surrounding them, then down at the crystal broth in her container, then at her crazy teammate. Slowly, incredibly, she smiled. All right, she said. Let's make Velroth eat his words literally. The human team worked late into the night, planning their impossible feast beneath the alien stars. Dawn on Kara 7 came with brutal suddenness. One moment the canyon was black as space, The next it blazed with orange light as the sun crested the rim. Temperature rose 20 degrees in the first hour alone. Dae-yeon woke to find Minho already outside their shelter, adjusting a collection of containers arranged in the early sunlight. "What are you doing?" he asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Solar water extraction," Minho replied without looking up. "If we're going to cook seriously, we need more water than our one-day ration." "I set up condensation traps overnight." "The temperature differential between night and day creates moisture in the air. These collectors capture it." Dae-yeon examined the setup with appreciation. Each container had a simple but effective design dark material to absorb heat, clear covering to trap condensation, collection reservoir at the bottom. It was basic physics but implemented perfectly. "How much have we collected?" he asked. "About half a liter so far." "Not much, but better than nothing. By tonight, we should have another liter." Hae-jin emerged from the shelter, looking more energized than she had the night before. "Good news," she announced. "I've been reviewing the cave system data. There's an entire network down there. If the tubers grow throughout it, we might have enough carbohydrates to feed an army." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Dae-yeon cautioned, though he was smiling. "First, we need to map the caves and test the tubers properly. If they're toxic, we're back to lichen and bugs." They divided tasks efficiently. Minho would continue improving their water collection and work on expanding their heating system. Hae-jin would map the cave network and harvest tubers carefully, marking which areas they took from to avoid depleting any single colony. Dae-yeon would explore further off-field, searching for additional food sources and anything that might serve as seasoning or flavor enhancement. "We meet back here in 4 hours, Dae-yeon said, checking his chronometer. "And remember safety first? We're no use to each other dead." The canyon revealed more secrets in daylight. Dae-yeon discovered a section where morning dew collected in tiny pools, and in those pools grew stringy aquatic plants that his scanner identified as edible algae. He found another grub colony, larger than the first, living beneath a rock slide. Most exciting, he discovered herbs. They weren't exactly herbs in the earth sense. These were hardy, desert-adapted plants that grew in cracks where no sunlight reached directly. They had tough, waxy leaves and roots that went deep into the rock, searching for water. When Dae-yeon crushed a leaf between his fingers, the scent was sharp and peppery. "Spices," he murmured with satisfaction. "Actual spices." He collected samples carefully, making sure to leave enough of each plant to continue growing. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Take only what you need, and the earth will provide again." Good advice, whether on Earth or an alien world. By the time he returned to camp, his collection bags were full. Hae-jin had already returned, looking tired but triumphant. She had filled 3 large containers with tubers pale, potato-like structures that grew in the nutrient mud of the lower caves. "I found something else," she said, pulling out a smaller container. "Some kind of fungus growing on the tubers? At first I thought it was rot, but the scanner says it's similar to earth molds used in fermentation, like the stuff that makes blue cheese or soy sauce." Dae-yeon examined the white and blue mold coating several tubers. "Fermentation? That's advanced preservation. If we can get this to work, we could age our food," Hae-jin finished. "Make it more complex, more flavorful, more like real cooking." Minho had been busy too. Their camp had transformed. He had constructed a proper kitchen area using flat rocks as surfaces. The heated stones from the thermal vent were arranged in a fire pit configuration, with smaller stones for more delicate cooking. He had even created a simple smoker using a hollow section of rock and carefully managed airflow. "This is incredible," Dae-yeon said, examining the setup. "We're engineers," Minho replied with a shrug. "We make things work." They spent the afternoon processing their harvest. The tubers needed to be cleaned, peeled, and tested. Dae-yeon started with a small piece, boiled until soft. The taste was bland but not unpleasant, similar to a very mild potato with a slightly sweet aftertaste. "Carbohydrates confirmed," he announced. "These can be our base." The new herbs were more challenging. Some were too bitter to use. Others had flavors so strong they overwhelmed everything else. But 3 varieties proved useful: one with a peppery bite, one with a cooling mint-like quality, and one that tasted almost like onions. Seasoning, Dayan said with deep satisfaction. We have actual seasoning. They began experimenting. The processed lichen from yesterday could be fermented with the blue mold Heijin had found. They set up a small fermentation container in a cool, dark part of their shelter, mixing the lichen paste with mold and a small amount of water. It would take time, but if it worked, they would have something approaching cheese. The grubs could be prepared multiple ways. Roasted whole for a crunchy snack. Ground into a paste for protein supplementation. Cooked in the crystal broth for a heartier meal. Daeyeon even tried smoking some over Minho's improvised smoker, and the result was surprisingly good, jerky-like, with a deep, rich flavor. The tubers were versatile. They could be boiled, roasted, or mashed. Thinly sliced and cooked on hot stones, they became chips. Ground into flour and mixed with water, they made a simple flatbread. Daeyeon's mind raced with possibilities. We need to think about presentation, Haijin said as they worked. If we're really doing this, if we're really going to invite Velroth and the other teams, we need to make it look as good as it tastes. Agreed, Daeyeon said. He had been thinking about this. On Earth, food was never just about nutrition. It was about culture, community, and art. Korean cuisine especially emphasized beautiful presentation and communal eating. We arrange everything properly. Make it look intentional, not desperate. That evening they tested their first real recipe. Daeyeon took the crystal broth as a base, added chopped tubers and grubs, seasoned it with the pepper herb, and let it simmer on the heated stones for an hour. The result was a stew that actually smelled appetizing. They sat together as the sun set, sharing the stew from their containers. It wasn't fancy. It wouldn't win any awards on Earth, but sitting there in the alien canyon, eating food they had created from nothing, it tasted like victory. This is really good, Haijin said, surprised by her own words. It's survival cooking elevated, Daeyeon replied. It's what our ancestors did for thousands of years. They didn't just eat to live. They lived to eat. Poetic, Minho said around a mouthful of tuber. But can we actually pull off a banquet? Daeyeon looked at their growing food stores. The fermentation experiment bubbling quietly in the corner. The smoked grub jerky hanging from improvised racks. The tuber flour drying in the sun. The herbs and spices collected and sorted. Yes, he said with confidence. We can. They worked into the night again, planning the menu. It needed to be impressive enough to shock Velroth, but practical enough to prepare with their limited equipment. It needed to feed at least 20 beings of different species, each with different dietary requirements. And it needed to be undeniably food real, prepared intentional cooking. Kara 7-stone soup as the main dish, Daeyeon decided. Crystal broth base, grubs for protein, tubers and herbs for flavor. It's hearty, it's warming, and it proves we can cook. Flatbread from tuber flour, Haijin added. Simple but effective. Shows we can process raw ingredients. Fermented lichen spread, Minho suggested, pointing to their experiment. If it works, it demonstrates advanced preservation. Smoked grub jerky for the protein-dependent species, Daeyeon continued. And fresh herb garnish to make everything look intentional. They had one more full day before extraction. One day to refine their recipes, gather enough ingredients for 20 beings, and prepare a feast that would change how the galaxy saw humans. We should send the invitation tomorrow morning, Haijin said. Give them time to decide if we're crazy or confident. We're definitely crazy, Minho pointed out. Maybe, Daeyeon agreed. But we're also right. Food does exist here. Life exists here. Velroth was wrong, and we're going to prove it with the most human thing possible. What's that? Haijin asked. Daeyeon smiled. A shared meal. Above them, alien stars wheeled through the sky. Somewhere out there, other teams were enduring, suffering through hunger, counting the hours until extraction. But in this canyon, 3 humans were cooking, planning, and preparing to teach the galaxy a lesson about perspective. possibility, and the indomitable human spirit, tomorrow. They would send an invitation that would be remembered for generations. Tonight, they perfected their craft. The third day on Kara 7 began with an announcement that would echo across the galaxy for years to come. Daeyeon held the emergency communicator in his hand, thumb hovering over the transmit button. These devices were meant for life-threatening situations only. Using one for anything else could result in disciplinary action. He looked at his teammates. "Last chance to back out," he said. "Send it," Haijin replied without hesitation. "We've come this far," Minho added. "Might as well finish it properly." Daeyeon pressed the button. The communicator crackled to life, broadcasting on the frequency monitored by all teams and instructors. His voice went out across the barren planet. "Instructor Velroth and all training teams, this is the human team. We cordially invite you to coordinates North-7-7-3, East 421 for a meal before extraction. We have prepared enough for everyone. Arrival time suggested 2 hours before scheduled pickup. We look forward to seeing you." He released the button. For a moment, there was only static. Then Velroth's voice came through, sharp with confusion and anger. "Human team, the emergency channel is not for social invitations. This is a violation of protocol." "With respect, Instructor," Daeyeon replied calmly, "we're not requesting rescue. We're offering hospitality. There's no rule against that." More static. "Then, you claim to have prepared a meal on Kara 7, where no food exists. That's why you should come see for yourself, Instructor. We believe we found a flaw in your survey data." The communicator went silent. Daeyeon could imagine Velroth's reaction, the reptilian scales rippling with disbelief, those red eyes narrowing in suspicion. Around the planet, other teams would be listening in confusion. Humans offering food? On a dead world? "Well," Haijin said into the silence, "we've done it now. No turning back." "Then we better make sure everything is perfect," Daeyeon replied. "We have 4 hours." They worked with focused intensity. Minho expanded their cooking area, arranging flat rocks into a communal dining surface large enough for 20 beings of various sizes. He positioned the heated stones strategically, creating zones of different temperatures for keeping food warm. Haijin handled logistics, calculating portion sizes for different species. The Clicker needed high protein. The Nephori absorbed nutrients through gas diffusion and would need the crystal vapor from heated broth. The Orphan rarely ate but could process mineral solutions. Each species had different requirements, and somehow they needed to accommodate everyone. Daeyeon focused on the cooking itself. This was the crucial part, the difference between merely edible and actually good. He started the stone soup early, letting it simmer for hours to develop deeper flavors. The crystal broth formed the base, rich with minerals. He added the grubs carefully, timing their addition so they would be tender but not overcooked. The tubers went in next, cut into uniform pieces. Finally, the herb, the pepper herb for heat, the mint herb for freshness. Just a touch of the onion herb for depth. The fermented lichen from 2 days ago had transformed. What had been simple green paste was now white with blue veins, the mold working through it like culture through cheese. Daeyeon tasted it carefully. The flavor was strong, pungent, and undeniably cheese-like. Not the best cheese he had ever tasted, but unmistakably intentional food, not survival paste. The flatbread was trickier. Tuber flour mixed with water from their collectors, shaped into thin rounds, cooked on heated stones until they developed char marks and became crispy at the edges. It took a dozen failed attempts before Daeyeon got the technique right. But eventually he had a stack of serviceable bread. The smoked grub jerky was ready, hanging from racks and strips that looked almost like beef jerky. The algae from the morning pools was cleaned and seasoned, creating a garnish that added color and nutrition. Everything was coming together. 1 hour until proposed arrival time, Minho announced, checking his chronometer. "Do you think anyone will actually come?" Haijin asked, arranging herb garnishes on the communal stone. "Velroth will come," Daeyeon said with certainty. "He's too curious not to." He needs to see if we're delusional or if we've actually done something impossible. What about the other teams? They're starving, Minho pointed out. Even if they think we're crazy, the smell of cooking food will draw them. As if on cue, a sound echoed through the canyon. Footsteps. Many footsteps. Voices speaking in various galactic languages. And beneath it all, a harsh hissing that could only be Velroth. "They're here," Hyjin whispered. The first to round the canyon bend was one of the Clictor, its antennae quivering as it caught the scent of cooking. Behind it came two Nephori, their suits glowing brighter as they moved closer. Then the Orthan and others. And finally, Instructor Velroth, towering over everyone, red eyes fixed on the human camp with an expression of utter disbelief. The camp had been transformed. What had been a basic survival shelter was now clearly a cooking operation. Containers of ingredients lined one rock wall. The smoking rack held strips of jerky. The fermentation vessels sat in the shade. And in the center, the communal stone was set like a proper dining table, with portions prepared and waiting. The stone soup simmered over heated rocks, filling the air with an aroma that was undeniably that of cooked food. Real, intentional, prepared food, Velroth approached slowly, as if afraid sudden movement would reveal this as a hallucination. The instructor's scales had stopped their usual rippling, a sign of deep shock in the reptilian species. "This is ... Velroth's voice trailed off. "Lunch," Daeyun finished, stepping forward. "We're glad you could join us, Instructor. Please, everyone, come and eat. We've prepared portions suitable for each species' dietary requirements." "How?" The question came from one of the Nephori, its glow flickering with confusion. "How is their food?" "There has always been food here," Hyjin explained, gesturing to the canyon around them. "You just have to know how to look for it." "And how to prepare it," Minho added. "Raw extremophiles aren't appealing. But properly cooked, fermented, and seasoned, they become cuisine." Daeyun began serving, explaining each dish as he went. "This is Kara 7 stone soup. The broth is made from thermal crystal formations dissolved in water. The protein comes from rock-dwelling grubs found in shallow caves. The vegetables are tubers from the lower cave systems, and the seasoning comes from hardy plants growing in the canyon shadows." He held out a container to Velroth. "This portion is optimized for reptilian digestion, higher protein, lower carbohydrates." The instructor took the container with clawed hands that trembled slightly. Velroth stared at the soup, at the visible pieces of actual cooked food floating in rich broth. Then, slowly, the reptilian raised it and drank. The canyon went silent. Everyone watched as Velroth's expression changed from suspicion to surprise to something that might have been wonder. "It's good," the instructor said, voice barely above a whisper. "This is actually good." "The dam broke?" Other teams pressed forward, accepting the portions Daeyun offered. The Clictor clicked approval as they consumed the protein-rich grub jerky. The Nephori absorbed the crystal vapor with visible satisfaction. Even the Orthan, who rarely needed food, tried the mineral-rich broth and made pleasant chiming sounds. The humans served everyone, making sure each being got nutrition they could properly process. Daeyun distributed the flatbread, demonstrating how to use it to scoop the fermented lichen spread. Hyjin explained how they had found and tested each ingredient. Minho described the engineering behind their cooking systems. Teams that had been slowly starving for 3 days suddenly found themselves at a feast. Not survival rations hastily consumed, but an actual meal served with care and intention. Some ate slowly, savoring every bite. Others devoured their portions and looked hopefully for seconds throughout it all. Velroth stood apart, holding the empty soup container, staring at the impossible made real. Finally, the instructor spoke. "How did you do this?" Daeyun wiped his hands and approached. "You taught us to survive, Instructor. But you made a mistake in your teaching." "What mistake?" Velroth's voice was quiet, lacking its usual authority. "You told us no food exists here?" "But that's not true." "What you meant is that no food exists here by your species' standards." "By galactic standards." You looked at Kara 7 and saw a dead world because that's what your experience told you to see. Daeyeon gestured to the canyon, to the hidden places where life clung stubbornly to existence. Humans come from a death world, Instructor. Earth is considered one of the most hostile planets in known space. We learned to survive there by finding food in impossible places. We ate things that would poison other species. We lived where others would die. And we did more than survive, we thrived. We made art and culture and cuisine from the raw materials of a dangerous world. He pointed to the soup, to the bread, to the carefully arranged meal. This isn't just food. This is human culture. We don't just consume nutrients to continue living. We cook, we season, we share, we make eating into something meaningful. That's what makes us human. Velroth was silent for a long moment. Around them, other trainees finished their meals, their bodies strengthened by unexpected nourishment. Some were talking quietly, discussing what they had witnessed. Others simply sat in satisfaction, the first full meal in 3 days settling warmly in their stomachs. The extraction shuttle landed with a roar of engines, sending dust billowing across the canyon. But for once, no one rushed toward it. Trainees sat around the communal stone, finishing their meals, talking quietly among themselves. Some were sharing their experiences from the past 3 days. Others were asking the humans questions about cooking techniques and food identification. Instructor. Velroth remained standing apart, holding an empty soup container and staring at it as if it contained the secrets of the universe. In a way, it did. It contained proof that the instructor's understanding of the galaxy was incomplete. The shuttle's cargo door opened, and 2 more instructors emerged. They stopped short when they saw the scene before them: trainees eating, a working kitchen, the smell of cooked food in the air. Velroth, one called out, a crystalline being whose voice sounded like wind chimes. What is happening here? The reptilian instructor turned slowly. The human team has prepared a meal. A meal? On Kara 7? The crystalline instructor approached the communal stone, examining the food with sensors that glowed brighter with confusion. This is impossible. Our surveys were incomplete, Velroth interrupted. The words seemed to cause the instructor physical pain. We classified this world as dead because we used our own species' definitions of life. We never considered that other definitions might exist. The third instructor, a floating gaseous being similar to the Nefori trainees, drifted closer to examine Daeyeon's cooking setup. Extremophile cultivation, mineral extraction, advanced fermentation. These humans have created a complete food processing system in 72 hours. Less than that, Minho corrected politely. We spent the first 8 hours just surveying and collecting samples. The gaseous instructor's glow pulsed rapidly, their species' equivalent of laughter. Remarkable. Truly remarkable. Velroth finally moved, walking over to where Daeyeon stood with his teammates. The other trainees fell silent, watching. The moment felt significant somehow, as if something fundamental was shifting. Corporal Daeyeon Kim, the instructor said formally. I owe you an apology. Daeyeon straightened. Instructor, no apology is necessary. You taught us well. You gave us the challenge we needed. I taught you arrogance, Velroth corrected. I stood before you and declared absolute truth about this world, never considering that my truth might be limited. I have traveled the galaxy for 3 centuries, and I thought experience made me wise. Today, you showed me that experience without humility creates blindness. The instructor looked around at the other trainees, all of whom had benefited from the human team's cooking. I told all of you that no food exists on Kara 7. I was wrong. Food exists everywhere if you have the knowledge and courage to find it. The humans understood something that I, in my centuries of life, had forgotten. Impossibility is often just a failure of imagination. Velroth turned back to Daeyeon. You said your grandmother taught you something. You mentioned it when we spoke before extraction. What did she say? Daeyeon thought of the small woman who had raised him, who had survived war and poverty and loss but always insisted on setting a proper table. She said even in hard times, Food shared is love shared. She believed that eating together makes us more than just individuals surviving. It makes us a community. Wisdom, Velroth said quietly. I have focused so much on teaching survival, individual endurance, personal strength, solitary persistence. But your species understands something deeper. You don't just survive. You create community even in hardship. One of the Clicker trainees spoke up, its translator rendering its clicks into Galactic Common. The human team could have kept all this food for themselves. They could have eaten well while we starved. Instead, they shared. Why? Because that's what humans do, Hyjin answered. We're stronger together. Always have been. Our ancestors survived Earth not just because we were smart or tough, but because we took care of each other. The crystalline instructor who had arrived with the shuttle approached Daeun. Your cooking techniques will need to be documented. The Academy must update its training protocols. Other species need to learn what you have discovered here. It's not really our discovery, Daeun said. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We just applied old knowledge to a new situation. That is the essence of adaptation, the instructor replied. Taking proven methods and applying them creatively, your species excels at this. The gaseous instructor floated over to Minho's engineering setup. This solar water collector is elegant. Simple materials, maximum efficiency. And this smoking apparatus crude but effective. I would like to include these designs in our advanced survival curriculum. Of course, Minho said. Knowledge should be shared. Over the next hour, as trainees and instructors prepared to board the extraction shuttle, something unusual happened. The humans found themselves not just accepted, but sought after. Other trainees asked questions about Earth, about human survival history, about cooking techniques and food processing. The instructors took detailed scans of everything: the lichen colonies, the grub habitats, the tuber growth patterns, the herb locations. This planet will need to be reclassified, the crystalline instructor said, making notes on a datapad. Not as dead, but as challenging. Hostile to most life, but containing resources for those with proper knowledge. We should establish this as a standard training location, the gaseous instructor added. But with updated protocols. Teams should be taught what to look for, not just told to endure. Velroth listened to this, scales rippling slowly. Change, the reptilian said. I have resisted it for so long. I thought my methods were perfect because they had worked for centuries. But the galaxy changes. New species join the community. Old assumptions must be questioned. The instructor looked at Daeun one more time. Your species is young? Humans have been spacefaring for barely a century. But you bring something valuable to the galaxy: a refusal to accept limitations. It makes you dangerous, yes? But it also makes you necessary. Dangerous and necessary, Hyjin repeated with a smile. I like that. As they began boarding the shuttle, Daeun took one last look at their canyon camp. The communal stone where they had served a feast. The cooking area where they had created something from nothing. The markers Minho was leaving: coordinates of food sources, instructions for future trainees, proof that impossible was just another word for not yet achieved. We're leaving instructions? Daeun asked. Someone else might come here, Minho replied. Might as well help them out. The shuttle lifted off, carrying 23 beings who had entered Kara 7, expecting a test of endurance but had instead experienced a lesson in possibility. Through the window, Daeun watched the canyon shrink below them, the orange rocks fading into the distance. So, Hyjin said, settling into her seat, what do you think our final evaluation will say? Probably something about unauthorized use of emergency communications, Minho suggested. Probably something about revolutionary thinking and paradigm shifts, Daeun countered. They were both right. When the formal evaluation came 3 days later, it included both a minor reprimand for protocol violation and a commendation for exemplary performance. But more importantly, it included a note from Instructor Velroth himself. The note read, I have taught survival for 213 years. In that time, I have seen courage, intelligence, strength, and determination. What I witnessed from the human team on Kara 7 was something different, fundamental refusal to accept the universe as it appears to be. You looked at a dead world and saw life. You looked at impossibility and saw potential. This is not just survival. This is transformation. May you continue to show the galaxy what humans can do. The note was copied and distributed throughout the Galactic Survival Academy. It became required reading for all incoming cadets. And attached to it was a new addition to the curriculum, a course called Human Adaptive Foraging, taught by guest instructors Dae-Yeon Kim, Haejin Park, and Min-ho Choi. 6 months later, Instructor Velroth stood before a new group of trainees, preparing them for Kara 7, but the speech had changed. This planet was once classified as dead, the instructor told them. We were wrong. Life exists here in forms we did not recognize because we did not know how to look. You will learn to look properly. You will learn that food can be found anywhere if you have knowledge and creativity. And you will learn the most important lesson of all: never accept impossible as an answer. The galaxy is too vast, too strange, too full of potential for such simple thinking. The reptilian instructor paused, scales rippling with what might have been pride. 3 humans once made a feast from nothing. Your challenge is to learn from their example. Not to copy them, but to think as they did, with open minds and brave hearts. Now let us review what we know about extremophile cultivation. In the Academy cafeteria, a new item appeared on the menu that day. It was labeled simply, Kara's 7-stone soup, original recipe. The ingredients were listed: thermal crystals, cave tubers, canyon herbs, and protein supplementation. At the bottom, a small note read, created by Corporal Dae-Yeon Kim, demonstrating that impossible is just another word for not yet achieved. Students from dozens of species tried it. Some liked it, some didn't, but everyone agreed on one thing: it tasted like possibility. It tasted like the future,